people don't normally let me go live. They normally like that editing safety net in the background.
Welcome, everybody. We're here again for another essential conversation at Wellbeings, and I'm very excited for our guest today, Dave Crosland. And just before I introduce Dave, I just want to share the context of why I'm exploring this landscape of bodybuilding and steroid use and the things that are not spoken, that are hidden behind denial and thick curtains of false positivity. Is for the last 3.5 years and more intensely in my clinical practice, we have been working with athletes, I'll call them, from the bodybuilding world, from the CrossFit world, from even professional golfers, where they are coming for therapy and they're also using steroids. And for me, this was a very fascinating journey where I was limited in my knowledge of understanding this world in a deep way. So a part of why I'm doing this exploration off and on over the rest of the year is to understand deeply what goes on behind the scenes, what someone like Dave with his experience can really illuminate, not just to me, but to the world of new teenagers stepping into this industry, or athletes who are in this industry, or amateurs who are wanting to become athletes, where we can have some sober thinking and some honest truths being named. So I just want to, for those who don't know Dave is an expert in image and performance drugs. Dave has been involved in the bodybuilding industry for 25 years, and he's competed at a national level. He advises professional bodybuilders on the preparation of performance image enhancing drugs. Dave is a bodybuilding judge, an expert in the field of performance and image performance enhancing drugs, and works closely with John Moores University in Liverpool, which helps them understand through steroid and research projects. Dave is also very well versed in understanding the social, behavioral, and health impacts, which is I'm really interested in that dynamic trio: the social, the behavioral, and the health impacts of the use of steroids. Dave runs a harm reduction service offering training and advice on performance enhancing drugs to keep people safe. Dave has spoke at the NPLD and police drug expert witness conferences. And Dave has made 2 films called On the Construction. Dave has been on the BBC, the ITV, and Sky. And there's probably about another 2 pages of stuff I can say, but geez, I think I'm doing all right so far to get all that out. Yeah, Dave is a very experienced, open and honest. And what I love about Dave is his honesty and his continual sort of untetheredness in this industry, where he's not afraid to speak where other people curl away and hide under the table. So Dave, thank you for standing on top of the table and coming in to speak to us today. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you. That was one of the longest introductions I've ever had, I think. I mean, I suppose really I know steroids from a usage point of view through to a criminal point of view, through to a social point of view, because of the work I do. So I'm a court-approved expert. I advise the ACMD, which is the Advisory Council on Misuse of Drugs, which sets in UK policy on drug policy. But at the back of all that is the fact that I was a very heavy steroid user. And I now live with stage 4 kidney failure and heart failure because of my drug usage and my endeavors to be the biggest thing that walked the planet. It's not something I say with pride, but it's not something I say with regret either. I mean, it simply is. And you mentioned the truth element. I try to be incredibly honest, and I try to live incredibly honestly, and people find that very uncomfortable because they tend to attach a certain negative or positive connotation to the truth, and the fact is there is neither. The truth is simply the truth. But it does tend to make people very uncomfortable. Yeah, I am a very open book. I'm under no illusions of what I've done to myself. I am not a reformed smoker. And by that, what I mean is I am not someone that now sits and preaches about the evils of steroids and all this because, oh, look what the drugs did to me. The drugs did nothing to me. I did it to me. But I am very much pro-education. I'm pro-choice. I'm pro-education. I have no judgment on what people do with their lives, but what I do suggest is that you make an informed decision on what you do with your life, and arm yourself with as many facts as you can. And when it comes to steroids, unfortunately, that is quite murky water.
Yeah.
But
I remember
yeah,
first time. On that note, Dave, I remember the first time I walked into a gym in, it was in the UK, and there was some young farmer who had found his hands on, his friends had some testosterone, and he was just taking about half a vial, he said, every day, for about 3 weeks, and he swole up like he was huge. And I was saying, man, are you okay? And he was having a difficulty in talk, and he said, man, this feels great. But I was so scared when I saw this guy. This was probably about 8 years ago. And so there is a lack of education out there. And there's a lot of things that, I think we spoke about it. My friend said this, or the guy at the gym said this. And somehow often it's very, very wrong.
Well, what you came online as I was finishing off in a conversation with an individual who is shall we say, a more senior individual who has followed the advice of a friend with some anabolic use because he's feeling his age, and he's now, I wouldn't say he's in a mess that he can't fix. It's definitely very, very fixable, but he's still in a mess. He's still got some problems that need to be dealt with, and he's having a hard time getting his head around the fact that he needs to actually do something about these problems he's created. But that's a common conversation. Unfortunately, there won't be a week goes by when I'm not informing somebody that they have done something to themselves through their anabolic use. It's not always a permanent situation, but sometimes it is. There's a lot of demonization of steroids, and the thing is, I don't think that helps anybody. I don't think when you demonize anything that you actually do anything positive about that, because it desensitizes the subject, or it overly sensationalizes the subject, which switches people off. I do feel that being open and honest about, if you're open and honest about the positives of what can occur with these drugs, and there are positives attached to the usage of this drug, then you can be open and honest about the negatives, and the individual is much more likely to believe and listen to you because you're giving a balanced opinion. When you go, it's the devil, it's going to kill you, you're going to grow horns, and you're going to rape little children, and you're going to eat bunnies, and you're going to beat grannies, then people are like, because it's too much. But if you say, look, this can do, oh, for God's sake, excuse me, sorry about this. I do apologize.
It's quite okay.
And let me put this on. So that's the blood testing lab. This never stops. This is all day long. But if you're honest and you say, look, these are the positive, or what you would perceive as positive effects from that drug, you're going to gain muscle mass, you're probably going to lose some body fat, your libido is going to improve, this, that, and the other. However, these are the negatives that you need to manage. And I'm a big believer in life that nothing's for free. And that came, believe it or not, when I was 16, I went to America for a year, and I went to school in America, and I had my very first economics lesson. Triton Regional High School in New Jersey. And the economics teacher sat us down, and he said, there's no such thing as a free school meal. And in fact, he said, there's no such thing as anything actually being free. Everything has a cost. And I argued this, and I was like, no, because if I've not paid for it, it's free. Well, somebody's paid for it, because everything has a value. And you may not pay for it financially, but you may pay for it another way. And I've actually very much lived by that in that I see everything as having a price or a cost. And that comes into the same with anabolics. Yes, there are benefits, but they come with a price. And the thing is, it's all right looking at that nice shirt and walking to the cashier with it until you find out it's 500 quid. Or you don't want that shirt now, do you? Because the cost is too high for what you perceive as the benefit. But if you don't know the cost of your drug use, how can you judge whether the benefit is worth the cost? And unfortunately, a lot of people find the cost out when it happens to them. And at that point, they're struggling to process it, deal with it, or even correct it. Because there are certain aspects of anabolic use that can be permanent. The main one being shutting down of your natural hormone production. And now, for most anabolic users, that's just sort of part of the course. But if you have that discussion with somebody who's not into anabolics and you say you're going to take a drug that's going to stop your hormones working for the rest of your life, that suddenly becomes a really big deal. And so, a lot of it is your perception of where you are with what that will cost you. Same as looking slim. I'm fat. There's no two ways about it. I am a fat individual. I have a high level of body fat because with the level of work that I currently do, I can just about manage 3 training sessions a week. And I'm sorry, but if you think I'm sticking to a rabbit food diet on top of that, sod off. The cost of that fat loss is not worth it for my perceived reward of what it will be. Yeah, will it make it healthier? Yeah, of course it will. But I don't perceive that as the benefit in relation to the benefit it gives me inconvenience with what I have to do day in, day out. And so, that's a very prime example. Doesn't mean what I'm doing is the right choice or the healthy choice, but it is my choice. And I think that's where people get very lost with truth and with these sort of things, is they get very judgmental. A lot of people go, oh, well, you shouldn't be eating crap. You shouldn't be having cheese on toast at 11 o'clock at night when you're sat at a computer working. No, I shouldn't. But I'm sat at 11 o'clock at night working, which I shouldn't be doing either. So if that's what gets me through finishing that report, for some poor sod who's desperate to find out what his bloods are like, then that's what it's going to be.
Hey Dave, I want to go back to something that I want to start us on a nice.
Sorry, I tend to go off on tangents. I do apologize.
But let's just take it back to where things got really real for you, where you started to, really get. Well, I'm going to invite you to start wherever you feel you like to start, where the journey started to really impact you in your life, earlier on, or at the movie stage, or in the prison stage. Like, where does it feel relevant for us to start, for the viewer to really get to understand the sort of foundation of what's created this encyclopedia of knowledge and sort of a quest for truth called Dave? So like where could we start?
I suppose it starts by me living my life in the complete opposite way. So it starts by me not being honest. It starts by me not being truthful with people or with myself. So normal upbringing, there is nothing in my life that I can say is a cause for how I've behaved. And I don't know what happened really, but I just developed a habit of avoiding conflict, but not in a way. It was more just a case, it was easier just to say what needed to be said to placate people than it was to be honest. The early years of my life, sort of late teens, early 20s, I was big, I was strong, I was full of roids. I worked the doors. I did a bit of debt collecting, and I wasn't particularly the nicest character. I wasn't a nasty person, but I did not so much nice things. I don't suppose I was particularly a good person to be around. That led me into sort of associating with criminal elements. That led me into starting to be a bit flippant about certain rules of the law, particularly associated with driving. I was a sod for cars not being insured and stupid shit like that. But I didn't feel in myself I was particularly a bad person, but I did start to recognize that my behavior wasn't the nicest. But there's an element of a power trip there. There's an element of, now I grew up a chubby kid that wasn't very good at sports. So to now be a big monster that people were terrified of was a bit of a power trip. And there was a buzz off that. There's no denying it. And then, I don't know, I stopped that sort of thing, though I continue with security. I set my own door security company. It grew bigger and bigger and bigger. But my whole life just ended up being, well, for want of a better term, bullshit. It was just, you know, whatever I had to say to get through the day. I wasn't dealing with problems. I was avoiding them. I was side skirting them. And things just built up and built up and built up. I got in trouble with the VAT through the business. And it wasn't that I was siphoning money off and I had a villa in Spain or anything stupid like that. I just basically was using the VAT for the cash flow because we were growing quickly and we were struggling with cash flow. VAT return came in. I altered the return to pay what I could pay, and that made it fraud. So at that point, I committed an offence. I had a VAT investigation. There was no not guilty on this. It was clear as day. I panicked. And again, a level of avoidance, a level of facing the truth. I ran away to Spain, then Canada, and then I got caught in Canada and I got deported back to the UK and I did 4.5 years in prison. And 4.5 years of sat there looking at why has my life ended here? And I don't feel I was any better or any worse than anyone else that was in that prison. But I definitely came from a different background from a lot of people that was in that prison. And a lot of those people hadn't had opportunities that I had. And it was, so why am I here? And it was my life choices. And what became very apparent was I wasn't being honest with myself. And I'd done a lot of things that I wasn't proud of, both in the line of security and that sort of stuff, but also in relationships as well. I'd had an affair on my first marriage, which had resulted in a child, which I ran away from. And I was deeply ashamed of that behavior, but I was also beating myself up about that behavior. And because I was living in the past, I was continually repeating it.
Yeah.
And so I slowly started to realize that, you know what, you've done some shitty things, you know. But that doesn't mean you're not entitled to be happy. And it doesn't mean that you can't move on in your life and live your life and be happy and be positive. And so slowly but surely, I started to come around to this. I need to be honest, first with myself. And the difficulty there is that you start looking at yourself, and we either tend to go one of two ways. We either go hypercritical, and I'm shit and I'm the scumbag of the planet, which is where I was anyway. Or we go very dismissive. And it's not, you've got to recognize what you've done and the implications of what you've done. And then you've got to learn from that and move forward. And that's what prison did for me. It gave me the opportunity to look very, very introspectively and really just sort of go through some of my behaviors. And a lot of stuff I couldn't remember. Now, my wife now is actually the woman I ran away from who was pregnant. And most people are, how has that happened? We've been back together 10 years and I am truly, truly happy. But I am truly happy because I don't have any secrets. I've pretty much laid my life bare online. And yeah, I got a lot of hate for it and I got a lot of criticism for it. But that process was healing, I suppose, really. Mm-hmm. Because you suddenly realize that you're not the only one. And I had this conversation with a counsellor this morning, because I train very early in the morning, and one of the lads that trains at the same time, our little 5 o'clock in the morning club, is a counsellor. Mm-hmm. Now, he deals with abusive relationships, abusive family units, that sort of thing. And I was saying, I don't think I could cope with that. I don't think I could cope with talking to someone who beats his missus. You know, I just don't think I could detach from that. But I was saying, I said, you know, you sometimes you look at your own life and you look at your own family and you think, Jesus, I'm just a fucked up mess. And it's only when you actually start talking to everybody else, you realize, hang on a minute, everybody's the bloody same. You know, this perfect life and perfect family unit that you see on social media actually isn't real. And most families are in some way quite dysfunctional. And that's actually quite normal. But yeah, the bare bones of opening up about your deepest, darkest fears remove their power. And you know, it's our insecurities and our fears that hold us back or control us or drive us in certain directions, when in fact they don't actually exist. It's all in there. We create it all.
Yeah, Dave, that's, you know, was this the sort of de-armoring sort of nakedness that you portrayed in on the construction sort of films?
Yeah, I mean,
that started that.
Yeah, the films so how it all started was I was sponsored by a company called SSN, the big supplement company out of South Africa. And they're very prominent in South Africa, and they were starting to move into Europe, and I picked up a sponsorship with them. And at the time, Rich Piana was with Mutant, and he was being relatively open about his drug use. And I was dying for the British. And I mean, I was a decent size. I was 310 pound at about 10%, 11% body fat. The guy that was running the UK arm of it all said, how do you fancy doing a Rich Piana style thing for your next bulk? And I thought about it, and I thought, you know what, because I was already getting into sort of harm reduction education at this point anyway. I thought, you know what, I would like to do that, but I want to do it my way, and my way is warts and all. There's going to be no sensationalism. There's going to be no, you know, bullshit. It's just going to be the straight, honest truth. If I feel like absolute shit because of the drugs I'm taking, then that's what I'm going to say. So they were going to launch a brand called Muscle Freak, and they were going to sort of tie it all in with that. And then, so they said to me, how big are you going to get? I said, well, as big as I can. He said, well, we need a number. And I couldn't think of anything. Now, I'm 6'1". So, and I always remember Craig Goldvax being 400 pounds. So I just said, 400 pounds. So it became this project to reach 400 pounds, but it really wasn't that. It was just about pushing myself to the actual physical limits of what I could achieve. But the other thing was, how can I talk and how can I relate to someone who uses high use of drugs if I've not experienced what they're doing? So the project became a YouTube thing initially. And it didn't have a huge amount of followers, and it got quite a lot of flack, and I got a lot of abuse because of it and all this sort of stuff. But it was like, yeah, whatever, just carry on. And then towards the end of the first set of my project, I was sitting about 365 pounds, and a guy called James Grealish, who's a filmmaker, approached me wanting to do a film about what I'd done. So the first film was a bit cobbled together. And none of it was made up, but it was just, we had to condense it into 3 days of filming to get the footage. But it was all sort of real life experiences. I mean, I went to a shopping centre, I went to Trafford Centre actually in Manchester. And, you know, I wasn't going that day, but we did that just to film people's reactions of what they did when I was out in public. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the drug use, and I tried to be as open and honest as I could. And then the second film we followed on, was when I pushed to 415 pounds. Now, during that film, my mum was killed. She got killed in a road accident. That's all in the film, raw and open and bare. Well, she was mad as a box of frogs, mate. I mean, who walks out at 5 o'clock in the morning in the pitch black in a black coat with a black hat and a black dog and then expects not to be sitting, you know, and stands in the middle of the road? You're going to get knocked down. I love my mum to bits, but she was a daft cow. But see, this is the truth. Now, people will look at that and say, oh, that's horrible. Well, no, my mum were bonkers. Love her to bits, but she were bonkers. but I also, you see my health decline.
Mm-hmm.
You see me end up in hospital with kidney failure. And the film tracks all this. And it's a very dark film. And I find it uncomfortable to watch. But it's also a very real film in that it shows what happens when people push too far. And the thing is, in most of this industry of fitness, the cameras would have been turned off a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
But it's like, no, people need to see what happens when you fuck up. So we kept them rolling throughout. I was even filming myself sat in a hospital bed. You know, there's edits in that of me sat in the toilet at 3 o'clock in the morning doing a growth hormone injection, thinking, what the hell am I doing? And through that film, I went down a rabbit hole of drug use and losing sight of where I was and losing sight of what I was trying to do and just really becoming drug obsessed. So now when I speak to people who are trying to reduce their anabolic use or trying to manage it better, I understand how they can get into a tunnel where they don't see a way out and where they feel that their physique requires the drugs, and because they identify as that physique, that means that they require the drugs, because without the physique they feel they are nothing. And at the end of the project, I mean, you go from being a 400-pound man that walks into a room and silences it just because you're stood there, who plays with 220 kilo in shoulder pressing, to a 26 stone fat, middle-aged, balding, weak individual who struggles to tie his own shoelaces without getting out of breath. And that's another journey in itself.
Yeah, I want to talk about that journey, Dave, but there was something you said there really I wanted just to get clarity on. It was very, very powerful. You said that you realized that you were like drug obsessed. Were you drug obsessed, or were you like size obsessed, or both? And can you, like, because there's something different, and like I'm trying to understand the deeper need for the drug, and like how that must have been feeling as you were getting bigger and bigger. What was that accomplishing?
The thing is with size obsession is that you are obsessed with getting bigger. Mm-hmm. And the process of getting bigger isn't just purely about drugs. It's about drugs, it's about food, it's about training. I got to the point where all I was thinking was, what other drug can I take to make me bigger? Yeah. I was no longer thinking, how can I squeeze more than 10,000 calories a day in? How can I make my training more efficient? I'd lost sight of the other two elements. So the only element I was focusing was drug. Yes, the end goal was, and this is the thing, I was obsessed. But you relate that scenario, change the characters and relate that scenario into any sport, and you're not obsessed, you're dedicated.
Yeah, I see this a lot in like I've been working with different sports people for years, but whenever, let's say you're a professional footballer, and then when you stop being a professional, like you are obsessed about it, but your relationships are impacted. And who are you when you're not that footballer? Which comes back to the point I want to come to now, like that journey.
Your identity. Your identity. You lose your identity, because the thing is, it doesn't matter what it is. It can be pottery. It can be tapestry. It can be gardening. But if you invest a huge amount of your money, your general resources, and your time into anything, then its value increases to you. And the more you invest in that item or that occupation or whatever it is, then that starts to become more of what you regard as being you. Mm-hmm. So housewives, on a very basic level, housewives go through this, because they are not Karen, Julie, Sharon, whoever they are. They are the wife of Bob, the wife of John, or they are Thingy's mum. And they lose identity because they're no longer a person. They're just the kid's mum or the husband's wife. And that's not nice, to not be regarded as an individual. But this is what happens to we do it to ourselves, you know. When a lot of people go to work and it's just a means to an end. But some people are lucky enough to do a job that they are passionate about and they enjoy.
Yeah.
But then that job becomes part of your identity. Now, that can be positive, that can be negative. It depends on how far it goes. But when you invest a lot of time in something, it becomes part of you. And sometimes that can be a little bit too much, and that can be a little bit overwhelming. And then you start to neglect balance. And the key to happiness, in my opinion, is truth. And it's the truth about where you are so that you can create balance in your life. Because if you're not truthful about where you are, then you can't create balance because you don't know you're out of balance. I get a little bit work obsessed. But some of that is also because a lot of my work is helping people. And I'm sure you'll relate to this. There's a reward in that is not financial, that you can't put pound notes on. Yeah. It's also incredibly frustrating. And sometimes you speak to some right dough balls and you really think, Jesus Christ, I just want to bang my head through a wall. But the thing you've got to keep remembering is, to them, that might have been the best phone call they've had all day. Mm-hmm. So there's a huge reward from that. But unfortunately, particularly in the world today, life is 24 hours. It's not 9 to 5 anymore. But so, yeah, I do get a little bit work obsessed, but I also work with my wife. So, we share an office. We work together all day, every day. I probably spend more time with my wife than most married couples do who work a 9 to 5, because literally the amount of hours we spend together. But I don't think anyone can work like that if you're not happy at what you do. Mm-hmm. But to be happy, you have to be honest, because you have to be honest about where you are. And there's nothing wrong with doing things for your happiness. You're allowed to be happy. You're entitled to be happy. There may be questions when your happiness is derived by somebody else's misery. That's a whole different argument. But, cool. You're not being selfish by looking after yourself. You're not being selfish by turning around and saying to somebody, no, I can't do that because I'm tired, because I've got too much on, because I just need half an hour on my own. Mm-hmm. You've got to look after yourself. But the world, social media tells us that we should be charitable. But what's the point if it makes you miserable? If you are a happy individual, you'll be more positive to everybody around you. And then they feed that positivity and it grows. If you're miserable, you will reflect misery from other people, and you'll end up surrounded by misery.
Well, you tend to be miserable when you're disconnected from yourself and you're overcompensating, caretaking, and rescuing everybody but yourself. And it kind of clocks up and builds up over time. That's one of the main things I see where mental health really gets depleted or really impacted. But I want to swing around to something here, Dave, and just really, in the world of bodybuilding today, mm-hmm. Can you walk me through, or walk the viewers through here, just the social, behavioral, and health impacts, psychological as well, that you have seen that is present in the present industry today, that's important to be named? They clearly outline just the social struggle, the behavioral, the psychological, and the physiological health issues that you see that is hidden under a duvet cover of murkiness and a lack of clarity, lack of honesty.
The health industry, or the fitness industry would be a better way, actually. The fitness industry is the biggest pile of bullshit on this planet. It is just smoke and mirrors, the vast majority of it. And that's not to say that people benefit from exercising. They do. And it's not to say that people don't enjoy exercising. They do. But what is portrayed through social media is, for the most part, a lie. It's an area in an industry where eating disorders are rewarded as being dedicated, where having a very imbalanced social life is being rewarded as dedicated. The more extreme you are, the more dedicated you are. When in reality, the more extreme you are, the more you're suffering from a mental health issue. I mean, the list goes on. Prime example, somebody we work with who I actually got quite annoyed with over this. He's been ill. He's been in bed for a week. Chest infection, cough in his guts, can't breathe properly. Went and stood on the stage at the weekend and competed. Why? Because he felt he had to. Why? Because he felt if he didn't, he wasn't a bodybuilder. You've already competed 9 times this year, which is 4 more shows than I told you should have done. The reason you've got a chest infection and you feel like absolute donkey is because you've done too much. You've ground your body into the ground. Why? Because nobody watching that show is going to give a flying monkeys tomorrow. Nobody's going to get up next morning and go, you know what? My life is 100% better because I saw him on stage yesterday. Yesterday, tomorrow's fish wrappings. Yesterday's news. So really, what did you get out of that show apart from feeling like absolute crap? And now beating yourself up because you came 3rd. When if you'd have turned up in condition and as you can, you could have won it. So what was the point? But you see this, I mean, you see, particularly in bodybuilding, you'll see it all the time. Oh, I'm bulking. Oh, God, I'm sick of eating. I can't wait till I diet. Oh, I'm starving. I can't wait till I bulk. But it's only 2 weeks to the show. Oh, well, I didn't do very well, and insert either politics, bullshit, or I need to do better depending on the type of person you're dealing with. But it's off season now. I'm going to get massive. 6 weeks later, God, I'm sick of dieting. I can't wait. Why are you doing this? Because at no point in this journey have I ever seen you express any enjoyment about what you do. Mm-hmm. I was heavily criticized for never being particularly lean. Now, at 450 pounds, I was a fat mess. But at 365, I had a decent balance of condition to size. Why was I never lean? Because I like eating and restricted. I didn't mind eating very boring, plain food. I just didn't like not eating a lot. And that made me miserable. And why did I train? I trained because I enjoy training. Mm-hmm. But so many people shoehorn them into lifestyles because they want to fit in socially or they feel they need to. And it's like, no. If you go to the gym 3 times a week just so you feel guilt-free about eating your pizza and having 2 bottles of wine at a weekend, fine, that's your choice as long as you realize what you're doing and you don't try and dress it up as anything else. But within this industry, we celebrate extremes. We challenge people that don't do extremes. You know, you hear people talking about, I'm going to war. No, you're going to stand on stage in your underpants covered in Marmite. You are not going to war. You are not on the beaches of Normandy at 17 years old having Germans shoot at you. You know what I mean? You are going to stand on a stage in your underpants and ask 7 blokes, maybe some women, to say if you look pretty. Don't dress it up for anything more than it is. But, you know, we make it's, I mean, this is social. This is the social aspect of life today already. We make stupid people famous. Mm. There are people, I won't name any names, but there are celebrities that I seriously wonder how they actually manage to put their shoes on in the morning. And it's like, why are you famous? And yet there's people doing life-saving research that worry about paying their mortgage at the end of the month. It's messed up, but it's just how the life is. But yeah, I mean, the amount of people I know within the bodybuilding community that, you know, have these strong social media followings and they always put these pictures up. Yeah, I know in the background, they're falling apart. Their health's gone down the toilet because they're using so many drugs because they want to maintain this image. And it's hard and it's difficult. I mean, I swear blind that if I'd have stayed at 365 pounds and I'd done the Americanization of what I did, I would probably have become a very rich man because I had enough of an extreme physique to become incredibly popular. And it wasn't just that I looked big and freaky, I could train hard as well. but I would also be dead, because my identity would have switched to that. And in order to maintain that identity, I would have continued my drug use. So by actually breaking myself, it stopped my drug use and stopped me losing my identity to the creature I had created. But unfortunately, a lot of people in the fitness world do create a creature that they then have to maintain. And like anything in life, nobody likes going backwards. Nobody. So whatever it is you achieve, if you feel that achievement slipping away, or you feel your standards getting less, be it weight loss, be it exercise capability, be it career prospects, whatever, just aging in general. You know, I'm losing my looks because I'm getting older. I was never good looking anyway, so I didn't have much to lose. But for some people, that is actually very relevant. Oh, I'm quite acceptable. I'm quite accepted. I've got a face like a baboon's ass. It doesn't bother me. It really doesn't. But the point is, you know, for some people, that's a struggle. So going backwards in anything is difficult for us. And when you're in a situation where there's a chemical available that can sort of slow that down a little bit, or even prevent it, even reverse it, you understand why people move to it, particularly when we live in a society where it's a pill for any ill. Because it is. You know, doctors don't treat health conditions. They medicate complacency. And it's not, I don't think anyone gets into being a doctor because he doesn't want to help people. It's just volume of work, financial constraints, everything else. You end up getting to a point where it's all just take these, you'll be fine. Not right. So why are you not sleeping? Where is this anxiety coming from? Right. Let's sort counseling out. Let's look at this. Let's look at that. They don't have the resources or even the time to spend that on one person because they've got 10 minutes per patient that they have to then write up the report, update their notes, write the prescription, deal with the individual, and get them out of the office before the next one comes in. So they just don't have the facility to be able to do that. But, you know, so we've grown into a society where it's like, oh, I'm in pain, take painkillers. Not, why am I in pain? Where's the pain coming from? Can I do something to stop the pain? How did I get the pain? Can I change my life? And actually, if anyone's familiar with ISO 9002, this might seem a really strange sideline, but bear with me. So many, many years ago, I worked in a foundry, and as part of that, I had to go on an ISO 9002 course. And basically what it is, it's a British standard that basically creates traceability. So if something goes wrong, you can track back, see why it's gone wrong, fix it, and put something in place so it doesn't go wrong again. You apply that to your life, and you'll find things do really get much easier. Because instead of band-aiding this, band-aiding that, band-aiding that, you take the time, you go back, you fix the problem. Then there is no problem. Instead of that problem creeping back up every, oh, I've got a dicky knee. Oh, okay, so I'm going to just rub some deep heat on it for a couple of weeks and it'll go away. 4 months later, oh, I've got a dicky knee. Well, why have you got a dicky knee? I don't know, I'll put some deep heat and it'll go away. When in fact, if you've gone back and thought, well, actually what it is, when I'm squatting, my technique's off and that's causing friction and problems with my knee. 3 weeks of pissing about, you fix the problem, you never buy deep heat again. And that's what we're very guilty of not doing because life is so fast paced. Life is so tomorrow. And I get that. I do. I mean, my time management is terrible. I tend to just sort of bumble through things. And luckily, it all seems to work out not so bad at the end of the day. As you are aware, because I missed our very first conversation.
You know, but it created a sort of more of a pull to want to have a second one, you know. But Dave, so
but yeah,
whenever when we think about that place where, you know, where the amateur or the professional is, or the young lad in the gym, or the young lady on stage, what are you seeing as the sort of the emotional or the health risks that are not that you've seen that are true, that happen?
Right. So I have seen people die in the pursuit of standing on stage. I have seen relationships end. I have seen people take their own lives. I remember one individual trying to take his and his child's life. Him and his child was in the car, and the exhaust pipe was being pumped into the car. Luckily, he did pass, but the child survived. Wow. So the cost can be huge, and I see very little people that manage to get that balance of, this is something I do, it is not something I am. One pro who was particularly good at that was Paul George, IFBB pro, then moved into powerlifting. He was incredibly good at bodybuilding is something I do, it is not who I am. And I think that is where a lot of people lose sight. Now, from just the industry in itself, what do I see? So I see injuries, physical injuries, where people just aren't taking the time off, sometimes life-changing injuries because they are not addressing an ongoing problem. I see eating disorders. Okay. Eating disorders are actually supported and celebrated by the industry. A couple of years ago, there was a big fad. So bodybuilders will tend to, for anyone who's watching who's not that familiar, bodybuilders will tend to say to very strict controlled diets, and they can be quite plain and a bit tedious and a bit boring. And they will allow themselves a cheat meal or a cheat day where it's free for all. And there was a time when it was fashionable for people to eat excessive in these cheat windows. And you'd see people applying through 10, 12, 15,000 calories of absolute junk. And that was celebrated because it is a sport that thrives on extremes. The whole grassroots of bodybuilding is an extreme physique. As time's gone on, those categories have watered down to make them more achievable for more people. But the only reason they've done that is because the organizations want money. It's business. If we stick with the freaky bodybuilders, we get 100 competitors in the whole of the country. If we get some classes which are for less developed and less conditioned and different shapes and sizes, then we get 600 competitors. And that's literally it. It's bums on seats, financial.
Dave, just coming back to something here. Whenever you see people having severe mental health issues, like where someone's wanting to commit suicide because of whatever's going on in the industry, apart from all the trauma and the historical hauntings that would be echoing through their past into their present, is the steroids also impacting on mental health? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So anabolics do have an impact in the brain. They have several impacts in the brain, and some of them we still don't really understand. We know they lower our perception of risk. We know they physically change the amygdala, which is our emotional control center. Certain compounds are, so for a very long time, particularly in academics and harm reduction, we argued that there was no such thing as roid rage. It was just that arseholes took steroids. We now realize that what we've been preaching for 15 years is wrong. And most of this has come out of a research from Oslo University, a young lady who I'm actually doing a conference with next week. But what she's discovered is that there are both physical and chemical changes in the brain that are permanent. And they do affect the emotional control and the aggression control of an individual. Probably the worst drug, most notorious for anger within bodybuilding, is Trenbolone, powerful veterinary drug. Well, one of the things that Tren does, and one of the reasons it's such a powerful and effective drug, but also one of the reasons it's so problematic, is that it can attach to lots of different receptors. So our body has androgen receptors, and we only have one type. And as an anabolic user, that's what you're interested in. You're interested in the androgens attaching to that receptor. But tren attaches to progesterone receptors, it attaches to estrogen receptors, it attaches to cannabinoid receptors, it attaches to glucocorticoid receptors. So it has this broad spectrum effect on so many different processes. And one of the physical impacts of this is a reduction in the perception of risk, resulting in a user being more open to using more or using different compounds. It also alters the way dopamine is transported, and it affects dopamine transport proteins. So as a result, we can see depression. It affects, now if you mix steroids, particularly NOR19 steroids, the DECA and tren, if you mix those with cocaine use, what you find is a massive escalation in cocaine use, because they actually disrupt the reward mechanism that's associated with cocaine use. So as a result, the user doesn't feel they're getting much off their coke, so they take more because they just basically assume that the coke's poor quality. A coldness, wow. a removal, a detachment emotionally to people around you. There's a lot of people that will report, again, particularly with tren, about a sexual aggression, a sexual predatorship. They'll describe themselves as feeling rapey. And there's plenty of partners that have complained that their partner's lovemaking is no longer, it's actually quite scary. It's quite intimidating. It's ended relationships. There's no doubt there are relationships that has ended because of trenbolone. So this is where it gets a little bit problematic, because we now know that steroids are actually addictive. Now, for a long time, we've sort of gone with well, they're psychologically dependent. But the fact is, no, there is much more to it, and it definitely satisfies the criteria for addiction. But then you add that to the fact that certain drugs will make you feel less flippant, sort of say more flippant about your drug choices, that you become less emotionally sensitive. So you're more shut off to your loved ones around you. Effectively, if you want to put it in layman's terms, you don't give a shit anymore. And that feeds further use and further abuse. But then on top of that, you've got this layer of, I identify with my physique. My physique is my identity, but I have my physique because of my drug use, so my identity is my drug use. Remove my drug use, remove my physique, remove my identity, I am nobody.
Well, then you get in touch with the trouble.
I mean, from health point of views, your main concern for most users is heart. Most problems are associated around the heart. Then we look at kidneys. On a few occasions, you will see full-blown mental health, psychotic episodes, but that's not that common. And you will see liver episodes, but again, that's not very common. But kidneys and heart are the main two.
I think you said to me before, it's short-term, it's kidney problems, long-term, heart damage.
To an extent, yeah. To an extent. Are steroids safe? No, not in the slightest, but neither is crossing the road. Are the risks manageable? If you're aware. And that's the big caveat. Are you aware of the risks that the drugs pose? Because I'm one of the top in my field, and I still don't know everything that tren does. And there are users out there using research drugs that all clinical research has been abandoned on. So they are literally the guinea pigs. It is amazing, but then if you take it back to a very grassroots, so if you break it down to a very, very simple scenario, as an individual, you're going to take a compound. You don't know what it is. You don't know where it was made. You don't know who made it. There's no quality control. The use by date is made up. The company that makes it is made up. There's not even a check from the raw supplies, the raw powders, the raw ingredients that are used in the manufacture of that drug. And you're going to take that drug, shove it in a syringe, and with a needle, inject it in your backside. Is that the thought process of someone who is balanced? Not really. Not really.
And I think this is a good subject as well. Just is there a lot of, because I had some messages from people today about different things, and one of the messages that came in and said to ask Dave, is there much home made in someone's house industry within the UK, and what's the differing health issues with some people making it in their home versus buying from a reputable supplier? Is there much of that going on in the UK at the moment?
So we have what we basically label as two types of drug supply. So we have pharmaceutical grade, which is genuine medicinal products that have somehow been filtered out of that controlled supply chain and entered into the black market. And we have UGL, underground lab. Now, even though they're called UGLs, do not for one instant think of a laboratory like you've seen on TV, because they are not. They are effectively people in their houses making this stuff in their kitchen. If they are on a bigger commercial level, they may actually have a unit. But again, it is not a controlled laboratory environment. There's no standard, there's no regulation, there is nothing. The vast majority of what are required or known as prescription grade drugs are actually fake. They are not manufactured to con drug users, as in steroid users. They are manufactured to con hospitals. But when those drugs enter the supply chain, they become tightly controlled. So it's very easy for a pallet to be siphoned off before they enter the supply chain from whoever is doing the fraud, and they can enter the black market. But a lot of what we know as prescription drugs are actually not genuine. There is some, but a lot are not. So the vast majority of drugs used by bodybuilders, when it comes to the actual anabolics, the steroids themselves, are what are known as UGL steroids. Now, that might be someone who is a PhD in biochemistry, making it in a relatively clean environment and doing the best he can to produce the best job. But it also might be somebody in the bedroom, and you've no way of telling. All you know is label and brand name. Steroids are sold on brand. They're sold on brand reputation. And I know a few labs out there that have reasonable reputations, and I know how they are made is borderline disgusting.
Wow.
I'm not going to name.
In your industry, where you're doing harm reduction and you're checking bloods, do you see stuff that point out that what they're supposed to be taking may not be what they're taking, or it's something else?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem with steroids from a point of view of health is not actually their sterility. Generally, that's not too bad. And the simple reason, if a steroid is quite unsterile, it will cause an abscess very, very quickly. People are very, very vocal about that, and that damages the reputation of the lab, and therefore they start to struggle with sales. So they tend to keep it relatively clean in that sense. And they do that by filtering it through a 0.22 micron physical filter. The problem is that the drugs aren't always what they're supposed to be. So a kilo of raw test powder is probably a third of the cost of a kilo of Primo. So it's much easier to put test in your Primo, which you sell at 3 times the price, and make more money. So there are labs that do it deliberately. That generally they'll start off with a good product. They'll sell high quality, high dose drugs. When as soon as they get a reputation for being quality, then they'll just start putting garbage in. They'll be very low dose, or it won't be the compound. It'll be a cheaper alternative. And then once that reputation is ruined, they change the labels and start all over again.
Wow.
The other situation is that labs are under quite a lot of pressure to supply the supply chains, and steroid usage within the UK is in excess of 1 million users. And I don't care what the new ASS UK report's going to come out, which is going to say a maximum of 650. It's full shit, because the data was screwed, because their collection points are very biased. I worked on the project, so I know. There is with doubt over 1 million users. Now, what sometimes will happen is a lab will need to make, for argument's sake, 2,000 vials of Masteron, but they've only got enough raw powder to make 1,500. So what we'll do is we'll mix some testosterone in with the raw powders and stretch it out a bit so we can get the 2,000. It is intentional, but it's not intentional because they're trying to rip somebody off. It's because they have a demand and they don't have the rule. Because, you know, they can't just go down to Costco and buy this shit. It has to be illicitly imported from China. It has to get through customs, and sometimes packages get seized. And your 3 kilo of testosterone powder you were expecting to turn up doesn't show. What do you do? What do you do? Ring every customer and say, oh, sorry, I'm not making any for the next 2 weeks. You just need to piss off and buy it from somewhere else. Or do you just get something out there so you maintain your supply lines? So there's that element as well. There is very, very rare occasions that the raw powders won't be what they're supposed to be. But that is generally, China are actually surprisingly efficient at sending over what people want and it being half decent. But there are mistakes, and at the end of the day, it's all white powder. So, you know, sometimes you might get sent the wrong bloody thing. The problem is there's not really any commercial viable testing services. So there's a company in Holland called Jancheck, but you've got to ship it to Holland to get it tested. And it's a bit of a ball ache. So it is really a bit of a stab in the dark. And what most people go off is either personal knowledge of the manufacturer or reputation of the manufacturer. But effectively, I can give me a microwave, a conical flask, or even a Pyrex jug, rapeseed oil, benzoyl alcohol, benzoate, and raw steroid powder, and I can knock you up a litre of testosterone in about 10 minutes.
Jesus Christ.
I will then need to put it through a filtration system to make it safe to use, but you don't need a lot of facilities. You just need somewhere to do it. I mean, I remember a case I did years ago, and the guy, he was some sort of chemistry student, but it was just being made on his desk in what effectively was his study room. And there was just conical flasks and shit everywhere. You effectively, all you do is you get the raw powder at the amount you need to make the strength of drug you're going to make. So for argument's sake, if you were going to make a litre of testosterone dosed at 250 milligrams testosterone per mil, then you'd have 250 grams of testosterone powder. You'd then add benzoyl alcohol, benzoate. Benzoate is to dissolve the powder. Benzoyl alcohol is to maintain sterility once it's been sterilized. It doesn't sterilize it, but because you're using a 10 mil multi-dispensable vial, it has to stay sterile. You then heat that up until it's fully dissolved. You then add in a carrier oil, which is normally just any organic oil, but rapeseed oil is quite common. So, or grape oil. So you add that up, you fill that up to the litre mark. You then pass it through a 0.22 medical filter. Now that isn't gravity fed because it's too fine, so it has to have vacuum to pull it through. And then once it's through, you have a litre of usable, injectable testosterone dosed at 250 milligrams per mil.
Wow.
And then you just decant it into 10 mil vials.
You know, I haven't been living in the UK for some time now. So legally wise, like is that illegal to make it?
Yes, manufacture is illegal.
Just sending thanks to your good woman there for giving you that good cup of tea there, Dave.
Just one second. Sorry about this. Go on.
I brought the lid, but they sent me a brand new one out.
Okay. So this coffee cup is a 50th present from my daughter. Right. This has come all the way from America. It arrived today. My birthday was last week, and my good lady wife just broke it.
They don't make them like they used to, you know.
Bloody price of that! It should be making its own coffee. Right. So the legality around steroids, people struggle to get their head around this. It's actually not that complex, but steroids are a Class C drug. So as such, the 1971 Drugs Act states them as being prohibited. However, there is an exemption clause that states that if anabolic steroids are for personal use, they are allowed. Importation since 2012 is illegal, and that was a condition that the Olympic Committee put on us having the Olympic Games. And the manufacture and supply is illegal. Now, if you're manufacturing, you're importing raw powder anyway, so you break the law because you're importing raw powder, and then you break the law because you're manufacturing. Supply does not mean that money has to exchange hands. If I gave you a bottle because you're my mate, I'm still technically supplying you. That is still illegal. There is a recognized homebrew industry within the UK. So there are people that manufacture for their own personal use and very little else, or for a small network of friends. So depending on the scale of the commercialization of the supply will depend on how it's viewed criminally. Now, where it gets a bit funky, but it's very rare. So the police are not that up on this stuff. They've ignored it for donkey's years. They've stepped away from it because it's got lots of long words in it and it scares the living shit out of them. But technically, if you were caught with a UGL steroid and it was personal, you've not got a problem. You've nothing to worry about. But if you were caught with a prescription, a pharma grade drug, even though it's personal, you have actually broken the law because you've broken the Medicines Act, which states that you cannot possess a prescription drug without prescription. And the prescription element is because with prescription drugs, they are brand named. They're not generically named. So if you have a generic steroid, it's not a prescription drug. But if you have Organon Sustanon, which is supplied by hospitals as TRT, well, it used to be, I think they've stopped using it now. That's a prescription grade drug. So therefore you're in breach of the Medicines Act because you are in possession of a medicine without a legal prescription for it. I've never seen that law enforced ever. And I think one is because there's never really been a need for it. Because generally speaking, if someone's supplying, they're supplying, and if they're using, it's not really worth the court's time. As to how lucrative the business is, Alpha Pharma was a Dutch guy that set up what was nigh on a full-blown lab in India. So they made very high quality products. They made very good quality products, but they just didn't have licenses for the products they were making. They imported that much to the UK. They started shipping over the raws and manufacturing in the UK. They got busted in 2000, I think it was 2019. They estimate 42 tons of steroids that Alpha Pharma imported into the UK. That's one lab. One lab. Wildcat got bust with a street value of probably, now when he valued it down. So I think he valued it about 10 million. But in reality, the street value of that bus was about 25 million. These are just two labs.
So Dave,
Wildcat.
So you've got Wildcat, you got these labs, so that it's showing that there's definitely there's people using these products, and it's rife in all the gyms in every little town and every big city around.
It's rife in places where you wouldn't think. There is a growing use of steroids in career choices. So think about it, all right? Stereotypically, what job do you associate, particularly historically, with steroid use? What did all the meatheads do at a weekend?
Yeah, bouncers and security.
That is a career that actually encourages anabolic use because you need to be bigger and stronger. Fire service, they have problems with steroid use. Police service, they have problems with steroid use. Armed forces, they have huge problems with steroid use. At one point, it was estimated that 1 in 13 of the guard regiments were using steroids. The army stopped testing because they couldn't afford to lose any more staff, because if they did, certain regiments, I won't name the regiments, were actually going to collapse because they didn't have the numbers to sustain the regiment. So there's 4 careers all linked with steroid
Wow.
use.
My God.
Another group you might not think of, 50-year-old. So I'm 50 now. I'm knackered. I get up in the morning and I'm like, Jesus Christ, oh, God kill me. And yet I sit at TV and I watch something for Warner Hotels and there's a bunch of 65-year-olds running around like spring chickens, banging everything that moves. Whoa, is that what I'm supposed to be like? So I'm 15 years younger than them, but they've got more energy than me. Something's not right here. Oh, look, as you get old, your testosterone levels decline. I know, I'll go to the doctor. Let's see what he says about my testing. Yeah, your test is a bit low for your age, Mr. Crosland, but it's not low enough for us to do anything about it. I'm not very happy about that. I want to look like one of them spring chickens that's running around doing everything. This one, look, TRT. Oh, I can buy it there from that website. And you've got a whole new generation of 50-year-old and 45, 50, 55-year-old males starting anabolic use for self-regulated TRT. The problem is here, they don't understand what they're doing, so they tend to overdose. And then 5 years' time, they're starting to get problems. But if you broaden away from anabolics and look at the world of image and performance-enhancing drugs, you're starting to look at tens of millions of users when you start looking at fat burners.
Wow.
There will be people watching this now that have bought fat burners online, not realizing that what they bought was actually an illicit drug because it's not policed.
Wow. So a lot of the fat burners out there, because it's such a big thing. Like I have there's 3 female clients that I'm working with, and they talk about using fat burners all the time, and right, they buy them online. They buy them online.
Have they ever mentioned ECA?
No.
Or T5?
No.
So one of the most popular fat burners is a stimulant-based fat burner called T5, but it's also known as ECA. It's called ECA because it contains ephedrine, caffeine, and aspirin. It's a thermogenic. It increases your body temperature, increases calorific burn, caffeine and aspirin in there because they restrict calorific burn. That's illegal. But it's not policed because it's just not fucking worth it. The weird thing about ephedrine is that you have to have over a certain amount before possession of it becomes illegal. But that is not a food standards approved medication, drug, supplement, whatever you want to call it. That is not legal for sale to people. But go on Facebook, go on Amazon, go on, eBay. Just type in ECA and you'll see rakes of fucking adverts of people selling it.
So there's just so much grey in this. There's so much chop that you can't see.
There are moves. So believe it or not, there is an agency within the British enforcement agencies, I'll use as the term, the Food Crime Agency. Now, currently, they are powerless. They have no enforcement powers. And they work very closely with trading standards. But they are gaining momentum, and their job is basically to regulate the sales of substances that effectively shouldn't be sold. So some of their big areas are peptides, SARMs, things like that. So SARMs are research drugs that have an anabolic impact. They've never managed to get a SARM to work correctly. SARM stands for selective androgen receptor modulator. It's supposed to be a drug that only targets the androgen receptor in muscle tissue. So it has no side effects and it doesn't cause shutdown of your own natural testosterone production. They've never got it to work. It either isn't tissue selective or it shuts you down. That whole brand of drugs has developed. A lot of development in those drugs has been cancelled now. There's a couple they're continuing with, which happens to be the original one, strangely. But there's a whole plethora of those sold by supplement companies online. They're not legal for sale. They are illegal to sell. But you can go on you type in SARMs and you will find loads of supplement companies offering those drugs out. Are they particularly harmful from a mental health point of view? Probably not really. They're not overly impacting there. Mm-hmm. But they will cause permanent shutdown of your hormone system. So they will render you testosterone replacement therapy dependent for the rest of your life if you abuse them. But then abuse is very much an individual thing. You know, one person's use is another person's abuse.
So Dave, on that note, so we got all these industries, we got all these different sort of catchment groups that are using at this time. As we're coming to the end here, like, what if you had them all lined up in a queue, and there was something that you needed to say that you wanted them to hear that would be important and that would help, that would be sobering to help them understand their choice of using any of those peptides, SARMs, anabolics, testosterone, tren, or whatever it is, well, what would be something you'd like to say to them that would feel important for the uneducated to hear?
I very much feel that usage is a personal choice. But as I said at the beginning, make an informed choice. And by making an informed choice, you need to know the pluses and the minuses. If the person who is supplying you the compound or has recommended the compound has only told you positives, then they are lying, because there is more to the story, because we go back to the old adage, nothing for free. Everything has a price. That price might be your health. So if you're looking at using something and it's touted as perfectly safe, doesn't do anything, look deeper, because somebody's lying. Everything has a price. I take a paracetamol. I have certain risks and conditions with taking that, and they are labeled in that packet. And it's a very bloody long list of the contraindications of paracetamol and what it can do to me. Absolutely. You know, it's the same with any medication. Does that mean that you're going to suffer that? No, of course it doesn't. There's no such thing as a side effect from steroids. There are only effects. Now, you might suffer from those effects, you might not. But if you don't know what those effects are, you don't know if you're going to be susceptible to them. For argument's sake, oh, I want to take testosterone. Okay, I had pubescent gyno. For those who don't know what gyno is, it's development of female breast tissue around the nipple in a male. Well, testosterone converts to estrogen. Estrogen causes gyno. That may not be the best choice of drug for you. And if you are going to take it, there are certain parameters you are going to have to control, mainly being its conversion to estrogen and your estrogen levels. So straight away, you know, there's things that need to be dealt with. So at the end of the day, you've got to be honest about where you are. Now, I won't stand in judgment of somebody who has chosen to take drugs because their diet's a bit shit and their training's a bit shit and they're using the drugs as a crux. That's their choice. But at least be real with yourself that you are taking those drugs because you know your training's shit and you know your diet's shit and you are looking for a cheap way out of it. That's fine. You know, I don't stand in judgment of that, but you've got to be real with yourself about why you're doing it. If you're not, then you're heading down a slippery slope because you're not being honest with yourself. When you start lying to yourself, eventually you start to believe your own bullshit. But everything has a price. Find out that you're willing to pay that price. And if you are struggling with mental health, if you don't feel you're in a good place, it's highly unlikely that your body of dreams is going to fix that. That's just a band-aid that you're going to try and cover up your lack of confidence when you really need to start falling back in love with you. And Amen. You know, just learning to accept you and not judge you against everybody else, because everybody else doesn't matter. There are people in this world far more intelligent than me. There are people in this world much more muscular than me. There are people in this world much fitter than me. There are people in this world much more financial beneficial than me. It has no impact on me. I go to bed on a night tired but content. I don't go to bed with a conscience where I'm struggling with anything, and I don't wake up feeling like there's anything that I should have done. And if you can live life like that, you should live life pretty well. That's
some solid advice there. You know, Dave, this is There's so many things I've learned to listen to you share today. So yeah, man, I'm moved, and I hope for the people who are listening that you really, you know, if there's any struggles around education, and if you want to make that informed decision and you want to find out and get support on an educational landscape or on a practical landscape, please contact the links below, www.davecrosslands.com, or the harm reduction website there as well. Please reach out. Don't be naive. As Dave said it, I'll put it in a different way. If you do the crime, can you do the time? If you're going to do something in the drug industry in relation to performance enhancing drugs, there will be a cost. Find out what that cost is, and find out whether you're willing to actually pay it, instead of being blind and diving in and having to pay the price years later down the road, whether that's a kidney issue, or whether that's a heart issue, or whether that's a relational breakdown, or whether that's a sort of a mental sort of decline of your own mental disposition. So if you're wanting to find out a little bit more about that, please reach out to Dave, and all the links are below here. And also from Wellbeings here, we also we have a database of different therapists who can help if there's somebody in the bodybuilding industry, because I believe there are struggles here in the bodybuilding industry, and I'm really passionate about having spaces for people to come, not just bodybuilders, but we're talking about bodybuilders in the fitness industry. So I really want to focus on that. Please come in if you're feeling that you've got body image issues and you're thinking that looking good is going to take them away. As Dave said, it's not going to take it away. It's good. It's going to go on the ground. So, you know, it's very, very important that there's these sorts of supports that are available out there, whether it's education or therapy. But the main thing is not to be alone. And so, Dave, thank you very much for today, man. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your hard-earned wisdom that you have gathered through a full life. And we'll be in touch, brother. Thank you very much.
Oh, I mean, we've only thank you. I said we've only scratched the surface here. Jesus.
No,
oh, hang on.
I would love to have you. I would love to have you back on a panel later on this year or early next year to really allow us to maybe have a longer event here to really expose and explore more of this terrain. Yeah, we've just touched it. But what we touched, man. Thank you for your time, brother. Enjoy the coffee, and thank you very much. Thank you, brother.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having us. Take care now.
Yeah, man. You too. So everybody, take care. We'll be back a little bit earlier next week. We're going to be on Monday. We have a lovely practitioner in from Dublin, Mark. So everybody, be well. Reach out if you need support, and don't be alone. We need people. So thank you for tuning in. Same time next week. Take care.